So now, through the magic of Zoom, let's all go to Sydney, time travel, and enjoy tomorrow morning's conversation with John and Graham Watts. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Susan. What a lovely introduction. I don't know whether to be pleased that I'm here in the evening drinking a beer, or whether I should be happier to be in Sydney before breakfast. Have you actually managed to have some breakfast yet, Jonathan?
I did actually, and
wow.
just to be sure, the Australian Ballet are actually based in Melbourne, so I'm joining you all. I can't quite decide whether I'm jealous or not, and I'm not having a glass of beer at 6:45 in the morning. But yeah, I'm joining you all from our home, and we found an apartment to live that we call home, with a lovely view of Albert Park and the sea just beyond us.
Commuting from Sydney to Melbourne puts commuting from Leeds to London and back into context, I guess, doesn't it?
You know what? It's interesting you say that, because the Australian Ballet feels both like a home company, like the Royal Ballet and like the Dutch National, but also a touring company, because we do spend 5 months of the year in Sydney. So the company have got very used to traveling between the two cities, and as we're discovering the Australian way of just jumping on the plane and going somewhere, sort of actually slightly shrinks all the distances. So in many ways, London and Leeds seem far away, particularly depending on which day you're trying to get on the train.
Yeah, I mean, just a few words of welcome to follow Susan's. I mean, I always think of you as ballet's very own J-Lo, and of course your Instagram handle is J-Lo Conductor, and of course most of the audience here this evening will know of you as a wonderful conductor, if not at Northern Ballet, music director, but they will have seen you at the Royal Ballet, for sure, Birmingham Royal Ballet, even Rambert, I think it was part of your early career development here in the UK. And now, of course, since October last year, I was going to say that our loss in the UK, but you're coming back so often, I'll talk about that in a moment, that it doesn't really seem like a loss. It's a kind of sharing, I think, a sharing of this brilliant conductor between UK and Australia, since you've gone there as the music director, working of course with David Halberg. And it's a double loss in a sense for us, since your partner, the charismatic dancer Laura Day, has gone with you. And of course we'll have many memories of Laura, whether it's in Metamorphosis by Arthur Pitter, or more recently as Sancho Panza. I can't quite get my head around the fact that I saw her as Sancho Panza, but anyway, it just goes to show her versatility, I think. Can I just also re-emphasize what Susan said, that if any of the audience have got a question, please use the chat bar, and obviously towards the end of my chat with Jonathan, we'll come to your questions. But let's start with the here and now. We know it's early in the morning over there, but how are you finding life in Australia? I imagine the temperature right now is rather different.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but with it being Melbourne, in fact, I was just thinking about what to wear today and checking out the weather forecast. It's 21 degrees max today, and it's going to be 31 degrees max tomorrow. So it's the sort of fluctuation of the Melbourne weather does keep us all on our toes. But just in terms of the company and ballet, we have just performed a gala program called Ballet Under the Stars at the Sydney Maya Music Bowl, with a really exciting and eclectic program that ranges from your usual gala fare of your Don Q pas de deux, your Corsair pas de deux, to a couple of pieces made by local Australian choreographers. One particular favorite of mine is called The Vow by a choreographer called Lucas Jervis, who I dare say you will hear a lot more from in the seasons to come. And he made this piece to an arrangement of Peer Gynt for the Hardinger fiddle. And it was an arrangement made for the Norwegian solo violinist Ragnhild Hemsing, who kindly gave us permission to play it. As it happens, it was played on a violin owned by the granddaughter of Sydney Maya, as we performed it at the Sydney Maya Music Bowl. And also on the same program, we had some more contemporary pieces, one by Johann Inger, as well as some dancing by indigenous dancers and also indigenous choreographers. So as the company's 60th anniversary season, it was really important to set off on the right note of not just excellence and world-class dancing, but also a real sense of an Australian heritage and the idea of inclusivity in it all as well. And as we parked that to one side, literally just last weekend, we're now running head on into opening our Don Quixote season in Melbourne, which opens in 2 weeks' time. Don Quixote, and this is Nureyev's Don Quixote. I think he created originally for Vienna to this incredibly charismatic and colourful orchestration by John Lansbury. And as many of you will know and will be familiar with Jack's orchestration, it ties in and it sinks in with the action on stage so well. And I think Jack's orchestra does comedy particularly well. And in this case, for Nureyev's Don Q, it pairs with each other so well. And this production, rather than just rehashing what was already in the store cupboard, the company are actually investing not just in international guest artists, and some are going to absolutely blow your minds to be announced. And as well as that, we also are creating the set design that essentially mirrors 100% the famous film made by the Australian Ballet with Rudolph and Lucette dancing,
and Helpman as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think Helpman absolutely stole the show on that film. And so as the audience comes to the theatre, I can promise you that they will be met by this three-dimensional recreation of that famous film. So the whole company is very excited about it. The dancers look absolutely wonderful. The orchestra are excited to play that score. And after that, I guess the company, they are already in creation for 2 brand new ballets, as well as casting an eye towards Jules. David, you mentioned David Holberg. His idea of programming is wonderful, and his artistry being in the studio is very exciting. So when he and I first spoke about the job, I was really thrilled by the vision that he's got to offer, and it's all coming up to fruition.
Jonathan, you're a wonderful interviewee. You've answered a clutch of my questions in one go, which is marvellous.
I'm so sorry about that.
No. I can see we're going to get along swimmingly. Incidentally, as a by-the-by for you and the audience, there is actually a wonderful documentary about the making of that wonderful film with Lucette and Nureyev and Helpman, and how they staged it in these huge, I can't remember if they were warehouses or aircraft hangars or something like that, but it's a great film. It's well worth sourcing if you get the chance. And I was going to ask you, because I read on Instagram about the Ballet Under the Stars gala, so thanks for mentioning that. But I think it's a huge arena, isn't it? 7,000 spectators or something like that. That must have been quite an experience.
Yeah, the Sydney Mire Music Bowl is normally reserved for rock stars, and therefore the Australian Ballet is absolutely the right people to be on that stage.
And you are, of course, J-Lo, so you know.
Well, yes, as they say, hips don't lie. So the normal capacity for the Sydney Mire Music Bowl, they can hold maximum 10,000 people. That is absolutely, with overspill out of the park and everything. And as it happens, because we had a rainy day, it rained all the way until the interval. And the stage, as is the case with a lot of these outdoor structures, they're incredibly well built and incredibly resilient, but we still had a couple of drips all the way through, which was wonderful in some ways, because you could really see the technical team and all the backstage team being part of the production. So it wasn't just the orchestra on stage and dancers and everything, but in between every number, as the MCs are filling the time with the set changes and everything, you just have this people furiously mopping the stage as if they were doing curling, and then occasionally going, oh, this patch, we're giving up on this patch, and they put down the towel, and as is important for health and safety, put some fluorescent tape all around. So it was almost like a minefield challenge. As the evening went on, the dancers were going, oh, we can't dance there anymore, we can't dance there anymore, what can we do? So they were adjusting their manage and all of those things, but despite the weather, we still had 7,000, as you mentioned, people turn up, and they picnicked out on the lawn, and they drank and ate merrily into the evening. It was wonderful. And it was wonderful to see a city that takes its culture so not just seriously and openly, but the population also receive it with open arms, because the Australian Ballet is only one of many. It's been this sort of summer outdoor performance has been going on for 3-4 weeks, and the MSO have been there. You've got rock stars, you've got pop artists, you've got jazz artists, and we live relatively, the Australian Ballet is right opposite the Sydney Myer Music Bowl in the Botanical Gardens. And as we leave work every weekend, you see all these clutch of traffic going in, and it's so well received. It's a city that loves its culture. And so to feel that so presently and so immediately through the applause and the roar of 7,000 people was wonderful. And the other part of it was, and we have the numbers to back this up, over 75% of the audience that came to that show saw the Australian Ballet for the first time. And that, and to hear that first time ballet goers audibly gasp and wow and sort of laugh at the acting, the fireworks that is happening on stage. Chen Wu Guo, who was dancing Corsair, was doing these 540s, and they were wowing and screaming their heads off at every single 540. And that's how the performing arts should be received. It's an immediate human connection between the performers and the audience.
Yeah, wonderful. It seems a little bit reminds me of EMB going to Glastonbury, or when the Royal Ballet did Romeo and Juliet with Carlos and Tamara at the O2. You know, if only 10% of those people who are seeing ballet for the first time come back and see it for the second time, and maybe Swan Lake or Sleeping Beauty, then it's the way to popularize the art, isn't it? So yeah, well, congratulations for that. A little bird called Instagram told me that you discovered the glories of chilled Pinot Noir in Australia. What else have you discovered in Australia so far?
Oh yes, I can't believe it took me so long to discover the glories of chilled Pinot Noir. And of course, it's such a wonderful grape, particularly in this part of the country. And I think we just had one of those 40. Melbourne touched 40 degrees recently for the first time in 3 years, and we desperately wanted something red to go with our dinner, and then so we put it in the fridge, and it was wonderful. Discovered mangoes. We discovered not discovered mangoes, but we discovered the beauty of locally grown mangoes, which is wonderful. We had our first Australian barbecue a couple of weekends ago, hosted by the lovely Stephen and Kathy Heathcote, and we were sat out in the garden and feeling all these sort of city wildlife with possums climbing the trees and all of that, and discovering the joy of being under the stars with our friends. And it's been great. There's so much still to discover in Australia, you know, like it's part of the draw for us to be able to be over here and be closer to the side of the world, which otherwise would be a triple lifetime, but now we can just take a weekend to Brisbane or New Zealand or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us how the role at Australian Ballet came about. Was it an ambition? Was it an offer? Was it something that you suddenly came up at the right time? How did it come about?
That's an interesting one. I guess it's all of the above, Graham. The first time I met Nicolette Frayon, my predecessor here, she went to Birmingham to do guest conducting for the Nutcracker, I think it was. I just thought, oh my goodness, it's so cool. The Australian Ballet music director, and this was like years before. So actually, since then, Nicolette and I had stayed friends, and we spoke regularly. And so when I saw in the papers in, I think, November 2021, that she was to be stepping down, it's big news. Nicolette was the first female music director of any Yeah, so I think she must have predated Andrea at the Royal, but being and even without that, having done 25 years as music director of a major ballet company like the Australian Ballet is a huge story, and it sort of sent shockwaves, if you like, amongst all of us musicians who was working in ballet. And so I reached out and said, oh, sorry to hear you're leaving, and we're just chatting without thinking much of it. And then completely out of the blue, I just got an email from David to say, can we have a chat? And I thought, oh, okay, this will be interesting. I wonder how Laura's going to take this. Because at the time, Laura was starting to teach class in Birmingham, and she was starting to think about the next step, if you like, from dancing. And so one thing led to another. David and I spoke. We met in London. And at the time, I said to him, look, I can't get out there until I couldn't have got out there until September for Romeo. And I remember in March in 2022, I was preparing for the Great Gatsby at Northern Ballet, and I just got a call from him out of the blue and say, look, can you spare a week anywhere just to come out and see the company, because the company would really like to meet you. So I managed to carve out a week in the middle of the Hans van Maanen Festival at Dutch National. So I was already living out of the suitcase, and then just jumped on the plane together with Laura, and then flew out here and met everybody. And then we fell in love with the place. I remember sitting there. It was one evening at St Kilda Beach. And it was June, so it was cold. It was really, really cold. And we were looking out in the sea and looking back into the city skyline. And I don't know whether you remember, there's a really famous picture of two penguins sat on St Kilda Pier looking back into the starlights. And it's sort of one wildlife photograph of the year. And we sat there and thought, yeah, this could be a wonderful adventure, and we should take this on. And so from that moment onwards, we sort of changed our mindset, if you like. That became an ambition, to answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
It went from something that arose organically and out of the blue, to an ambition to want to really actively consider the move. And it was just further enhanced by my experience with the company on Crown Coast Romeo and Juliet. And also, of course, meeting the orchestras, the Australian Ballet and Orchestra Victoria, which is one of Melbourne's two major symphony professional orchestras. They're actually related companies. Orchestra Victoria is a subsidiary company of the Australian Ballet, so they are our partner orchestra in Melbourne. But also then meeting the Opera Australia Orchestra, the resident orchestra of the Sydney Opera House, like the orchestra of the Royal Opera House, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
who played for us in Sydney. I was just met by this wonderful sense of openness and enthusiasm for always keeping things fresh and alive. And of course, as you know, you must, I don't know how many performances of Wolfworks you're planning to see, for example, coming up, but it must be many, because show after show, different casts, different people, different energy. And there are orchestras who are comfortable in doing the same thing night after night, but orchestras here, they were so hungry for freshness and for change. And for, of course, when we change, we stay in the box, but it's stay within the box of whatever the show asks of us. But all the little nuances from every night, they are inspired by it. Mm-hmm. And so after that, I just thought, no, we've got to do it. But then that ambition became a conversation that has to be shared between Laura and I, and thinking about, okay, how are we going to tackle this big move,
Yeah, so in a sense, it was pretty much all of those things coming together, the ambition, the opportunity, etc. I mean, dance, of course, is an international profession. I'm always amazed about dancers who are in a gala one night, and then they're catching a flight at 5 a.m. the next night to go either back to their company or to perform somewhere else. And it's the same, of course, in all the performing arts. But it does strike me that conducting is a profession which really is itinerant. I mean, you've been a guest conductor pretty much all over the world, and now here you are with a job in Australia, but you're still coming back to the UK. So I know you're coming back to do Great Gatsby, I think, in Leeds, Sheffield, and Sadler's Wells, and you're also going to do Cinderella, I think, at the Opera House, and Beauty as well at some point during the spring. So you're going to be here. It's almost as if we haven't lost you. Actually, you're going to be here quite a lot doing all of these things, and still doing guest work elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. And I have to be very grateful to the Australian Ballet and also David for allowing that. But I think it's also important for the company to keep their conducting roster fresh, so that you do have different input from different conductors, and also from my perspective to really show off and share what the Australian Ballet has to offer. So if we can get all my colleagues from around the world to come and visit and to guest conduct, all the better. So currently we have Charles Barker, who used to be company's music director, but I think went to Royal for a couple of years, and then it has been principal conductor with the ABT for a long time, and he's here to guest conduct. He's also got a personal connection with the company because he's married to Miranda Coney, who was the principal ballerina of the company, if you like, of the time. And so, yeah, it's important to have that guest experience for artistic exchange and enrichment, if nothing else. Danil, who's going to be guest dancing Basilio for us, Danil Simkin. I saw him in rehearsal a couple of days ago, and I was like, you know, that gala that you did in London, did you fly back for that? Because I saw him in Sydney a couple of weeks before. He was like, oh yeah, I flew back for 4 days. And I said no to that gala because I couldn't take that. So some of them do take it that one step further.
Some of us, Fiona, I know, was there, who's in the audience. I was there at the dinner after that gala, talking to him until 2 a.m, and I think he flew back at 5 or something like that with no sleep. So I mean, dancers are amazingly resilient characters, but conductors too, I think. Let's go back to the beginning, if I can, Jonathan. Having spoken about your current situation, tell us about your early life in Hong Kong and how you came into music. That I know will be interesting. Was it something that was always there in your blood? Did you come from a family of musicians? How did you come to know that music was your future life?
Oh, Graham, I wish I could say either of those things, but the truth is neither. my parents are, well, my dad is pretty scientifically tone deaf. My mum has an appreciation for music, but particularly ballet music, actually. But music was a profession that was actively discouraged. I remember telling my parents that I was to study music. I essentially didn't tell them what I was applying to do. I just told them I was applying to university. And when I got my offer from Oxford, I just told them I was going to Oxford. And I think that it was subsequent, that in the next paragraph of that conversation, when it came out that I was to be studying music, I think my dad, in fact, I know he said this because I would never get this. He said, "What are you doing music for? You are not a Yo-Yo Ma."
They had no inkling that that's what you wanted to do.
Not as a profession. They knew that I did it actively, and for a lot of, I'm sure for a lot of people who may have come across with that particular culture, extracurricular studies like music and sports for someone who grew up in Hong Kong is a part of your armory that you need to succeed in society, because there are so many of you. You need something to distinguish you from the other 330-year-olds who are also in the same school as you are. And so music was something that they encouraged me to do as a student and as a teenager, but discouraged me from thinking of as a profession. And so when I wanted to do it seriously, and when I took it on as a job, like, you know, my granddad was saying things like, can you really make a living out of being a musician? They genuinely couldn't believe it. And of course, there are times as a freelance musician when you yourself couldn't believe that you were doing that as a job either. But yeah, so, but then on the flip side of that, growing up in Hong Kong, there was this wonderful culture, which I'm glad to say that it's still there whenever I speak with my friends who are still living in the city, that Western culture, Western high art, if you like, like classical music, like classical dance, and like art and wine tasting, all of those things is really cool and trendy for the younger population. So unlike in the UK, when we're always talking about trying to get more young people into the concert hall, into the theatre, in Hong Kong, it's young people who go to the concert hall. And so that was what got me into it. My friends and I, we would scour the CD shops at the weekends instead of trying to get into a pub and listen to music and read scores and talk about conductors and interpretations. And that was what got me hooked, because it was the thing that was cool.
How did your musicianship start, and when? I mean, did you start with the piano, with the violin, or was it a multiplicity of instruments?
Yeah, it was the piano to start with, and then I picked up the French horn because my school, it's as an illustration of this idea of music being an extra badge for somebody. My school at the time wanted that music as an extra badge, so they just thought, oh, we should start an orchestra. Who was interested? And of course, loads of people queued up, and we literally queued up and got examined. They sort of looked at you, or they turn up, showed you to open your hands. They asked you to open your mouths. They asked you to take a deep breath, and they go, you play the French horn, you play the clarinet, you play the percussion. And then we would just siphon off into these groups, and then that was how the French horn came about for me, which I'm extremely grateful for because it's a wonderful instrument.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you came to Oxford to study music. That was obviously a very deliberate choice. You talked about telling your parents about it. Why did you choose Oxford in the UK? Was there a particular reason rather than going to the States or somewhere else? Or what was the reason behind that?
Yeah, so I actually came to the UK when I was 15 to study to go to school to start with. And I was glad that I got out of the Hong Kong school system. I went to school at Bedford. And my biggest claim...
Bedford.
You didn't.
I went to Bedford Modern School. Which one did you go to?
I went to the Bedford School, I'm afraid.
There you go, you see. Sister schools, though.
Yes, absolutely. With my claim to fame being once bowling out Sir Alistair Cook on a choir tour when he was batting with a water bottle. So I'd say I went to Bedford, and it was just one of many schools. And my sister and I, when my family decided to send us to school in the UK, one of the schools, many schools and many cities and towns that we visited, and thinking which school to go to. And Bedford was the one where both my sister and I got into school. So she went to Bedford High, and I ended up at Bedford. So from there, Oxford, because at school then I was given opportunities to conduct and to get my hands onto directing ensembles at school. And so when I said to my schoolmaster, my director of music at the time, to say, oh, I love to take conducting seriously, but there is no undergraduate conservatoire in the UK that offers conducting tuition as in a serious way. They all do it as a bolt-on. And so as a symptom, if you like, of these private schools, they said, well, just go to Oxford and Cambridge, get an organ scholarship, and you get to conduct choirs all the time. Mm-hmm. The issues there being that I didn't play the organ, nor did I know anything about the Anglican choral system. And so essentially I had 6 months to join the chapel choir and learn the organ. And so I got an organ scholarship to go to study at St. Peter's at Oxford. I think they must have been that desperate for organ scholars that me with my 2 pieces of music that I could play on the organ, they still accepted me.
Just going back to Bedford for a moment, the late Henry Danton was also a Bedfordian. Your school had the White Eagle, we had the Red Eagle. You were in the centre of the town and we were on the outskirts. So yeah, we were a bit this poor relation. When and how did conducting for ballet become a big interest? And sorry, but just before that question, when you were at Oxford, had you then got the ambition to be a conductor? Had that already kind of resonated, or was that something that came later?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do have to sort of thank the British education system that didn't channel people, they didn't box people in. So when I came to the UK and went to school and said, oh, I would love to be a conductor, people go, yes, that's great, go for it, rather than the no, you can't because that's not a serious job attitude. So I was allowed to let my conducting ambition blossom right from school and all the way through university. And so from university, it was music college. It was a natural progression at the Royal Northern. And then from there, as graduates of music colleges do, you do your competitions, you apply for this, that, and the other fellowship and assistant positions. And wonderfully, Birmingham Royal Ballet ran and continues to run a conducting fellowship, although it's under a different name now and is partnered with the Royal Ballet. And this fellowship gave me my way into ballet. I fell into it. I didn't think, and why would you? Because no music conservatoire offers training for ballet conductors in any way, shape, or form at all in the world. And so why would you, when you go to when you go to a conservatoire, to go, oh, do you know what? I fancy my hands at ballet. And ballet conducting, I think there's still this perception that it's a sort of lesser form of conducting than other genres. And it is something that we are, without any personal agenda, passionate to try and change, because the industry needs it. And so after falling into the fellowship, I enjoyed what I was doing. They enjoyed what I was doing. And so one return engagement in Birmingham led to another, and it led to the Royal, it led to other places.
So it sort of takes off from that early beginning because you're good. That's why. When I've been very privileged that I've interviewed quite a few wonderful conductors: Barry Wordsworth, Kern Kessels, Gavin Sutherland, just to name but three. And the one point that's come across to me very strongly, it's obvious, but you know, it's only when you talk to them that you realize the kind of significance of it, is that if you're conducting an orchestra for a concert, it's complicated enough. You've got all the different sections, you're managing them, you're integrating them, sorting out their timing and all the rest of it, but it's all more or less at one kind of level. When you're conducting for ballet, you've got a whole other dimension, because not only are you managing the orchestra, you're also managing the tempo for the dancers on the stage. That must be incredibly difficult. What's your strategy for managing dancers? Do you talk to them before performances? Do you listen to what their views are, what their concerns are, how they want the tempo to be? How does that work? Is it a daily thing, or once you've got used to a particular dancer, you're fine, you know how to manage them forevermore, as it were?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think getting to know a dancer is an important part of it. Of course, you understand their habits, but I think most importantly, and I love your word of how you manage the dancers, because oftentimes people ask me that question framed in a way of how do you follow them? But I think there is a sense that we don't manage them like we manipulate them, but we manage a situation often, and that's the key to it. And for me, one of the most important parts, a way into managing a situation, is that daily exposure to their artistry, but also to how they approach their work in the studio. So through that time in the studio, you start to understand and get a feel for their psychology, and for their own idiosyncratic quirks, if you like. And so that then informs you whether they are somebody who likes to be challenged, who like to be pushed, who like the music to try and push them slightly above that comfort envelope, or whether they are somebody that needs looking after. And that, going back to your point, it depends a little bit on the repertoire, depends on what it is they're dancing, and depends on their personal relationship to that repertoire. Was it something that they danced previously that they can they love, they had a wonderful experience with, or was something that perhaps unfortunately they suffered an injury from, and so they have a hang up about it and all that sort of stuff? And with all those extra bits of information in mind, that all goes in that pot of, okay, before the show, they call beginners. And I have this habit, and I insist that also for any guests that come to Australian Ballet, for example, at beginners, go on stage, check in with the dancers, say hello. Even if you say nothing else but, hookers, have a great show. And then I like to just say, cookers, have a great show. Is there anything you'd like me to know? Sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sort of also get a sense of how they are with it, and just, like you say, manage a situation. And so in the pit, you can, even just on the way down to the pit, you sort of have an idea of, okay, this is going to be what sort of night it's going to be.
I remember Gavin Sutherland, I think it was Gavin anyway, said to me that if Scandinavians have 50 words for snow, then dancers have 50 ways of expressing a desire for slow. Is that your experience too?
Oh, that's such a typical Gavin statement. I love his eloquence. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes they've occasionally also used 50 words when simply the word slow would have sufficed. But yeah, absolutely. But of course, it's the beauty of it. It's art. It's not your speedometer in the car. And there, just in the way that there are 50 ways you can shape a phrase, both musical and choreographic, there are 50 ways slow could be interpreted. And one ballerina's slow looks and feels very different to another ballerina's slow. And I love that about it.
Yeah. Of course, the other dimension to this is the composer. Of course, in most of the ballets that we know and love, the composers are long gone. But of course, there are new works. You talked about new works being created on Australian Ballet. Do you how important is it for you as the conductor to be integrated with the composer for a new work in terms of what their feelings are for the work and how it should be conducted? Because you've got this kind of dynamic going on in a new work, haven't you? You've got the composer who feels how his work should be played, the choreographer who's interpreting that work in movement, the dancers, and the orchestra. You're kind of playing four-dimensional chess there.
Oh, just in the way that there are 50 words for slow, there are also 50 types of innuendo for artistic discussion between these great artists. I think, but that's all of these, all of their own personal artistic agendas and how they all mix in together. It's this infernal in which great art is created. And so, but it also depends on their relationships as well. And this is why, and it's interesting from your perspective as well, having seen so many performances and seen so many new creations, how many new works by a choreographer that you see has a score by the same composer that they've worked with for many, many years. Because there's a layer of comfort that they rely on. It's a blanket that they wrap themselves around and say, okay, I've got this big commission with, I don't know, with Vienna or something, and they go, okay, I worked well with this composer, so I'm going to stick with this. And as music directors, sometimes that's a blessing, because you go, well, this is great, we know this relationship works. Sometimes it's a challenge, because you're trying to steer them away from the same aesthetics, so they can have something different. And so just in that same way that you talk about their own artistic ideas and everything, sometimes you wish that they could be exposed to more ideas, both from the choreographer's perspective, but also from the composer's perspective, and say to them, look, you've worked with this choreographer a lot. What about this other choreographer and their language? What sort of music would that inspire in you? And so, yeah, I think I don't know. I do wish that there are more people who would sort of expand their pool a little bit.
That's a fascinating point, Jonathan, actually. And some choreographers do surround them with themselves with the comfort blanket, not just of the same composers, but the same designers, etc. Of course, there have been a few occasions, quite a few famous occasions, actually, where that familiarity between choreographer and composer has sort of gone off the rails. I mean, I can think of 2 or 3 instances where, you know, a composition has been jettisoned. David Bintley certainly did that with one work, and they brought in a new composer, or, you know, a few weeks before the premiere, the choreographers worked out that the music doesn't work. Happened with Akram Khan Suzel, of course, bring in a new composer. So sometimes the familiarity doesn't work, but I think you're right. The refreshing of ideas and the mixing and matching of creative talents is an important thing. I mean, conducting for ballet in the past, at least, has often been regarded rather snobbishly by some orchestras and some opera houses. I remember a very well-known ballet conductor telling me a story of struggling with an orchestra at the Bolshoi, and they weren't really paying any attention to him. They were being really rather rude, and he had to go and get Pavel Sorokin to come and talk to them. He gave them a talking to in Russian, and then suddenly everything was all right. And I've heard so many stories like that about a bit of snobbishness towards ballet from certain orchestras. Have you experienced any of that, or do you think that's now kind of it's something in the past, it's not really happening now?
I think certainly not so much from the orchestral musicians in my own experience, which I'm very grateful for. But I think within the profession for other conductors, there is still this sense of you do ballet because you do nothing else. And for me, it was important part. It was an important decision to really try and change that. Because like you say, and like I'm sure everybody appreciates, it's a skill set that is unique and specific, but it's also incredibly rewarding and actually challenging and artistic. Because, and I think this here lies the point why orchestras over the years have developed this idea that ballet is a lesser form of music making, is that conductors, I'm not saying that I know anybody who does this, but perhaps musical decisions were justified in the name of a compromise for the dance. And I think it is almost our primary purpose as conductors on the podium for ballet, that when we stand on the podium, we convince the orchestra that whatever the production asks of us, not ballet, but because the same thing happens in opera and musical theatre or whatever, anything to do with theatre, whatever the production asks of us, it is done in the best musical way possible. So we want to give an illusion, if you like, but a heartfelt one, a conviction to the orchestra that even if I'm conducting for this ballerina who needs looking after, the rubato that I'm doing has a musical logic to it. And then at that point, the musicians stop thinking, oh God, I'm waiting for this lift again. Or, oh God, why is this so slow? Because they need to dance is that slow. Because you're giving them a musical reason to do so. So just because it's fresh in my mind, the adagio section in the pas de deux of Don Q, in the Act 3 pas de deux, the ballerina likes to balance. They like to especially show off and look how many hours I can stay on my leg and all that sort of stuff. And if you're trying to facilitate that, then on the podium, particularly in the moment, when you find a way to convince the orchestra that this musical line has a way to blossom, so this note just doesn't sit. So you ask the orchestra to reshape this note, and we worked really hard at it, particularly at the Outdoor Music Bowl, so that I'm giving you time, the violin section, to play this note for a very long time, not because I'm waiting for her, but because I'm giving you time for this flower to bloom. And so then the orchestra comes back to you and say, God, it's really nice to have a conductor who doesn't care about the dance. And you sort of go, well, no, I do, but I'm just putting it to you in a different way. And that's our job. We're there to translate and to be the conduit between the two.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful story that exemplifies your responsibilities in both directions to your orchestra and to the dancers. I mean, you're certainly not a conductor that is only doing ballet. I mean, you were guest conductor of a symphony orchestra. You were conducting the Manchester Chamber Choir, both, in a few years leading up to the pandemic. You're so busy at ballet now, especially with your, traveling around the world from Australia to London and points in between. Are you getting enough opportunity going forward for other forms of conducting, or are you really now ballet is the main and only thing?
I still try, and I'm still, whenever I'm in the UK or here in Australia, trying to develop relationships with other orchestras. But as you say, the ballet is getting busier and busier, and with production stacking back to back, one thing that I say to myself, and I'm convinced that I never want to sacrifice, is that studio time. And you need that time in between. But also that studio time gives you the opportunity to go and do things in the evenings if you can. So whilst sort of daytime orchestras may be harder to fit in, but for example, I'm hoping to return to Cape Town, but not to the ballet, but just to the orchestra, because we had this wonderful time together with Patina and Romeo last summer, winter, whichever way around you look at it. And so, yeah, when I can, I still try and fit in. But the other part of my career that I'm incredibly passionate about is work with amateur orchestras, because I love it particularly when I work with an amateur orchestra that can play, and then the word amateur returns to its original meaning of lovers of music. And my God, yes, I love all the great professional orchestras that I work with, and they, of course, they all love the work that they do, but at the end of the day, it's also a job for them. So, but then with an amateur orchestra, they're there at 10 o'clock at night after a day's hard work or whatever jobs that they have, just like everyone here, staying up until late into the evenings for your passion. It's incredibly inspiring. And so whenever I can, I'll fit all of that in.
Choreographers, of course, are music junkies. They're always looking for music to make work too, but they can't know music in the same way that you do or other conductors do. And I always wonder when I'm talking to conductors, what great music is there out there that hasn't yet been turned into classic choreography? I mean, maybe there's been attempts, but they're not popular. I mean, if you waved a magic wand for a few days and you were suddenly a choreographer, what music would inspire you to make dance that hasn't really been used?
Oh, that's an interesting one, because Laura and I had a discussion long into the evening recently about we went to a concert in the name of scouting for composers in particular, and we were having a chat about what music should be choreographed to, and it was interesting because from a musician's perspective, you suggest great works like canon works of music that this should be choreographed to. But then from a dance choreographer's perspective, they always go, "Oh, there's too much in it." I don't know. Can I turn the question around almost the other way and say, what? As all dance lovers and yourself as well, like what do you think dance needs in terms of its musical requirements now? Is it
I think
Max Richter? Surely not.
Well, we've just been listening to Max Richter last night, of course. I mean, what I do feel is that certain pieces of music they're like catnip to choreographers. They're used over and over again. I don't know if anybody in the audience has seen it, and I strongly advise that you do if you get the chance. But I saw both in Brighton and at Sadler's Wells last week, Dada Masilo's The Sacrifice, which is inspired by The Rite of Spring, but she doesn't use any of Stravinsky's music. And what she does use is this incredibly eclectic African score by 4 composers that is one of these really unusual scores that you just immediately fall in love with, and it's got this incredible lament at the end, and an operatic aria sung by the mother over the dead body of her daughter, the chosen one. And I think that that's what I love. I love it when choreographers use their own music. I was going to come on a bit later to talk about electronic music and how you feel about this huge kind of swathe, fashionable swathe towards the use of electronic music. I mean, even in the Sacrifice recently, there's the percussionist. He's a bit like the Music Man, and he's got all of these different things that he picks up, wood blocks and bird whistles, and he has this length of, I thought it was rope, but he whirls it around his head to create the sounds of wind in the African bush. And when I was asking him after the performance, and I said, that's an amazing instrument, where did you get it from? And he laughed, and all the other people laughing. He said, I was looking for something that would make that kind of noise, and I took a length of tubing out of my mum's washing machine. I just love the face of his poor mother in Johannesburg or somewhere, going to do the washing and realizing that the tubing had been pinched by her composer's son. But no, I think that, that this kind of innovation in music, I really love. But I do feel sometimes that I go and listen to new work and it's not music that I'm listening to, it's white noise, or it's, tin cans being bashed around. And I wondered what you felt about, that sort of move away from orchestral music, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's an important innovation. I mean, it's an often said cliche that if Mozart was around now, he'd probably be writing electronic music for video games, because that's somewhere where his imagination could run wild. And when you've got the technology to help you with things, absolutely use it and do it. But it needs to be done with an artistic and an aesthetic integrity, and not, like you say, just for sound effects. And it's interesting, actually. I was talking to a legend of the ballet world recently about music in general, and they were saying how, and we were talking about it in the context of tempo, and they said, well, it needs to be nice to listen to, and then we could dance to it. And then we were talking about, basically, essentially the idea that don't make any compromise. But I think that on that point about not making compromise, it needs to go right back to the creative process. Is that choreographers and directors in the beginning, when they commission, don't make any compromise in the same way that you wouldn't compromise for the stage set of how it's going to look. You spend all this amazing, lavish amount of money to make it look incredible. Don't make any compromise for the musical score, because there is, just like the ballet, is something that you can really leave a great legacy for. Because after all, if you look back in the 20th, 21st century, some of the greatest and most innovative pieces of music were written for dance. Music that propelled the course of musical history were dance music. And this goes right back all the way to the Baroque, and it was dance music that stayed. It was dance music that was first notated down because people needed to do that the same thing again. And so, but then the flip side is also true, and I wonder how you feel about it. More than one director has said to me, oh, an audience, when they go to the theatre to see ballet, they listen with their eyes. And so it's their way to justify, if you like, their requests for tempo or the requests for a particular score to justify their musical decisions. And I don't know, and I sometimes I sort of slightly oscillate between 100% agreeing and 100% disagreeing on that statement.
Well, it's an interesting way of looking at it, and of course they do, in a sense, listen with their eyes. But just going back to my earlier point, I mean, there are composers that historically, or traditionally, I should say, people have said, well, you can't choreograph to Beethoven, or you can't choreograph to Mahler. But of course you can, and there've been some wonderful works made to both those composers' music. But do you think there are any composers that have been sort of neglected in terms of choreography?
I think yes, absolutely. I think for me, there's a huge, I mean, to just to plug something out of it. So, for example, I think there is some great ballets to be made from the choral tradition. That yes, you think of your Glorias and you think of your all of those Fauré Requiems and Das Lied von der Erde, because you mentioned Mahler, but the idea that you could put dance on top of poetry, on top of music, it's a really difficult challenge, because to set music to great poetry is already one layer on top, and then to put dance on top of it, it's really easy to gild the lily in all those things. But if done successfully, there was a real sense of the total work of art that could be done here, but isn't, and I use that phrase deliberately, it isn't seen from an operatic perspective, but seen from a dance perspective, and how the emotion, and because it's more not just talking about rhythm, we're talking about the emotion inherent in the intensity of words and music, how that feeling that can elicit in us and how that could be manifested in physical movement. I think there is something to be tackled there. I know I keep shying away from your very specific question of a composer of a work, but it's a bit like choosing your favorite children.
Yeah, no, I never ask people what their favorite ballet is, especially dancers or conductors, that's for sure. But moving on a little bit, I mean, I know it's the same for dancers, but it does occur to me that I know you conducted many performances of Nutcracker, for example, over the Christmas season, as you will have done in previous years. And of course, there will have been and there will continue to be many performances of Swan Lake, Giselle, Sleeping Beauty, Don Quixote, etc., etc. With different casts, so different requirements, different dancers. But how do you approach conducting the same piece of music many times? Do you see it as a different piece of music every time?
You mentioned Nutcracker. I was the first conductor in the UK to break the Nutcracker duck last season on the 4th of November. And I was the last to do it on the 14th of January. I remember going to do Nutcracker in London at the Opera House and walking on my way in and seeing all these discarded Christmas trees on 12th night. And in fact, that was the evening when the Christmas tree didn't grow and we had to stop the show.
Ah, yes, of course.
Yeah, and I was like, there is something there. Conducting the same score again and again. It's a bit like seeing the same friend again and again. Or it's a bit like having a long-term relationship with somebody. That yes, it's the same person, but there is always something fresh to find if you have the desire to find it. And this relationship could be romantic, could be platonic, could be purely professional. But so long as one keeps one's mind open and put in the effort to keep it fresh, it's actually really fun and really easy, because there isn't the stress of going, oh God, I've got to learn something new. You open a score and you recall all the sensations you felt on that page, whether it's, oh God, I remember that wonderful dancer who made this solo come alive because they gave us so much inspiration on stage, or you remember, God, that was the night that fell apart, and all of those things that come back, and and because of all those things, you then create a different image of how you're going to tackle it in this performance. So I have this habit of sponsoring post-it note companies, and blue post-it notes on my score are things that I'm going to do slightly differently every night. So for those of you who are down in the pit and look down on my score and go, oh yeah, what are the post-it notes for? The blue ones are for the ones that go, it could be something as mundane as, do you know what, I could conduct this corner slightly differently to make the brass more tidy tonight. Or, do you know what, I'm going to change this phrasing massively so that instead of the phrase going there, I want it to go 2 bars later. And so because of the blue post-it notes, I sort of go, okay, what can I do because of course you need to effect all these changes without any rehearsals at all. So you then find a way with your body to go, whether you're telegraphing something by, I'm sort of sharing my tricks with everybody. Feel free to tell all your conducting friends and get them to try it at home and see that it works at all. So if I know that blue post-it is coming up, I minimize everything that I'm doing just before. And then as I'm approaching it, I do almost like a telegraphing, look, ladies and gentlemen, something's going to be different. And then I make what I want to be different really obvious, and to try and keep it fresh every night, but without saying anything. And if it's successful, it's really wonderful, because the orchestra go, God, I don't know what's going to happen tonight, rather than, oh my God, a show 25 of Swan Lake. Yeah,
so it keeps it very fresh. I mean, again, you've preempted my question rather wonderfully, but I was going to talk to you about your pre-performance ritual. I mean, the blue post-it notes sound great because, of course, you can put them on and take them off. But I mean, do you routinely mark up the score, before each performance? What is your pre-performance ritual, or do you even have one?
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, of course, the post-it notes, you look to the score, you go back to think, okay, what am I going to do differently tonight, and all those sort of stuff. You review your different casts. So they all have their own post-it notes, if you like, particularly with something like Don Q, where how many key trees? We've got 6 key trees coming up. Each of them do their solos slightly differently, some with very, very different steps than the others. And you've got to be really clear in your mind about what each of them do. But that's the sort of score preparation, if you like, because so much of that would have been done ahead of that half-hour core. And in that half-hour core, I just have this really, really weirdly, and I think I know where it comes from. It comes from cricket. This really odd ritual of putting my concert clothes in the right order. So it has to be trousers at the half, shirt at the 15, shoes and tie at the 5, and then you go to beginners. And
Wow.
I don't put on my jacket until I hear the A outside the pit door, because then I love that last minute being in the zone moment. It's like turning on your engine. Yeah, it's like that's my pre-performance checklist, to use an aviation analogy. And so the last thing I do is to shut the cockpit door and off I go.
So woe betide anybody who comes in and interrupts you in those last 30 minutes. At the moment, you should be, putting on a particular piece of clothing.
They're just going to have to contend with me getting dressed with them at the same time. And
I'm coming towards the end of my questions, John. I've just got a couple more. I mean, one is we've talked about you. We haven't talked very much about Laura. I just wanted to find, she's working as a repetiteur, I think, in the company. Is that right? She's not dancing anymore.
No, she is indeed. And so we're getting married in July.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Where in Australia or here, or where is it happening?
No, so we got engaged last August, before we knew we were moving. And then so after we got engaged, and of course we knew it was on the cards, we just got, oh, do you know what? Let's just organize the wedding. So there was something about everything being the first venue we saw, the first dress that she saw, apparently, although of course I still haven't seen it, and the first date that we picked, and everything. And so we basically put everything organized, and so we're actually going to get married in Oxford.
Oh wow, fantastic.
Yeah, on the first Monday after the BRB season finishes. So the party is going to be carnage. And yeah, so she's here. She's, like you say, working as a repetiteur with the company on specifically Swan Lake, specifically Don Q, and then what the future holds, we will see.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations from me, and I'm sure from everybody at the London Ballet Circle. And my last point, really, it's not really a question, it's more a tribute, because my colleague and in fact, my predecessor as chair of the dance section of the Critics Circle, Mike Dixon, once described you as, and I quote, "without doubt, the greatest ballet conductor we have in this country." Well, we still have you because we're sharing you with Australia, but it's a remarkable tribute. And is it something you feel that you have to live up to? I mean, how do you feel about being described as the greatest ballet conductor we have in this country?
Oh, I think I shudder a little bit, and I
worry did it deliberately.
I worry a little bit about how my colleagues would feel about that. But of course, it's a wonderful quote, and my agent manager and I use it in various publicity places. So I'm very grateful to Mike, and he's been such a big supporter, particularly of Northern Ballet too. And
absolutely,
we appreciate that.
I mean, I have to say, this has nothing to do with the interview, but it does worry me greatly that we don't have many critics out in the away from London. It's a massive issue for us, actually, trying to find people keen to write about dance other than in London. But that's a completely different point. Now, I've gone 3 minutes over my allotted time, and this is the moment where I find out all the questions that I wish I would have asked, because we're going to go to the chat. Now, where do I look? I look in the chat, and I see there's some in the Q&A, Susan, as well. So let's go. Okay, it says here the chat is disabled. I haven't been looking at the things here. Okay, the first question. I'm not going to mention who the questions are from in terms of full name, because I know this is recorded for GDPR, but first names are okay. And this is from Fiona, and she says, "I see many composers in the world of film, and there is money in it, which is an attraction, I'm sure. I wonder if those composers who compose for film need to learn skills to compose for dance. or should choreographers adapt to using their existing music? There's a big pool of talent there for the dance world to tap. Do you agree? Well, it's two questions, but thank you, Fiona. Over to you on that one, Jonathan. So composers for film translating to dance.
I think it's an interesting one, because there are specific things which dance choreographers require in terms of what they need, but at the same time, just in the way that composers could respond to that, I do wish also that choreographers would respond. So to answer that question specifically, it's like, yes, they do. Of course, there are things and specific nuances they need to pick up for dance, but I really would urge, if I was part of that conversation, that it goes both ways. That the choreographers could also try and adapt what they are, not adapt, but try and find a response in the steps that they make that can really answer and partner the music that may not have been specifically tailored for a step, so that the conversation is much more two ways. And absolutely tap, yes, agree, 100%.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I mean, of course, dance on film, particularly during the course of the pandemic, has become so important that there's been a kind of fusion in a sense. And I'm thinking particularly of Mikael Carlsen's work for Scottish Ballet and Birmingham Royal Ballet. I mean, he is a film, largely known as a film composer. I know he's done operas and other things as well, but there's a kind of crossover in a sense in his work.
But dance is theatre after all, and dance and theatre is film put on a stage, and so I think that there are a lot of parallels there. Where and I think it's easy to think of dance music as something that is very specific and four square, but like you say, like Mikhail's music, it works wonderfully for that sense of dance theatre, and within it there are also steps. And so it'd be nice if the steps are part of the drama rather than everything else being subservient to it, I think.
Well, we seem to have done a good job here, Jonathan, because there are a lot of things in the chat and Q&A, but they're almost all congratulations, thanks, what a wonderful job you're doing, those sorts of things. There's one interesting point here from Michael, who just reminds us that the iconic Don Q film that we both mentioned earlier, the one that filmed in the aircraft hangar, is on DVD, and it actually includes the documentary on its making. That must be where I've seen it actually, Michael, but thanks for that. So anybody wants to see that, you can still get the DVD. And Rosie says, fantastic interview, one of the best the LBC has given, in my opinion. Well, that's nice, Rosie. Thanks. I'll pay you later. I've noticed the quality of the orchestra when KL is conducting, and he is just so vibrant in his love of music and dance. So it's not really a question. It's a comment, I guess. But that's it. I don't see any other questions. So, Jonathan, can I just say, from my point of view, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful interviewee. You have answered all the questions extraordinarily well and preempted many of the questions that I was going to ask in the question before, so that's been even more lovely. So can I hand back to Susan for some closing remarks?
Thank you so much. I think I'm on. Yes. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Your passion and your absolute love for music and dance and your excitement, it's just oozing out of you. I mean, there's no way I can imagine any orchestra not just right up to a whole new level. It's absolutely amazing. I'm curious, have you taken dance, ballet lessons yourself so that you can understand more exactly how the music affects the movement?
If you call prancing about in the kitchen with Laura giving me tuition as dance lesson, no, I think I haven't, but I keep urging that one day we will do a music staff do bar sort of thing for some sort of online social media charity event. But I do have to. I say to Laura that she's been one of my main inspirations, and I have to say that. But it's true, and having that help at home is great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. The dancers in the Australian Ballet and all the companies that you guest with and belong to, they're very fortunate. And we as audiences are absolutely the beneficiaries of the whole thing. It's amazing. Graham, it was a great conversation. Thank you so much. You asked all the questions that we could have thought of, and it was terrific. And you'll see Dame Monica is here with me.
Hello, Monica.
Hello, Jonathan. I just
How
want
are you?
I'm
Hi, Monica.
hello, Graham. I'm just so thrilled that so many people have got to hear about your enthusiasm and the way, because I'm in the very fortunate position of having been in a dressing room with you or in an office or wherever, talking about music and dance and experiencing your enthusiasm and your incredible sharp intellect, and the way you care about dance and dancers. And so I think tonight, now everybody who is listening tonight now knows so much more about how you approach your work and how fortunate we are to have you doing what you're doing. So thank you.
That's very kind, Monica. And I can just stress that I was not getting changed at that time when Monica was in the dressing room.
Was Monica getting changed at the time is the question.
I can't comment.
Anyway, but we do miss you here in the UK, but we're very fortunate. I'm assuming you will be here in August when the company is at the Royal Opera House, and we will get to see you and Laura. And
Yes.
great. We can then throw some confetti at you because you'll be married by then. Be wonderful.
We can see you. We can see you in March, can't we, Jonathan? With Great Gatsby, I hope so.
Yeah, I'm doing Gatsby in Sheffield, and then followed, as you mentioned earlier, by Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. So looking forward to all of that.
Wonderful. Oh, we are fortunate. Well, those of us who can't get to Australia to see you there, we have the opportunity. And we all, as Dame Monica said, we all wish you and Laura the greatest happiness, both in your marriage and your new life in Australia. It's wonderful. And I hope you've done the Sydney Harbour Bridge climb. It's well worth it.
We will do that next.
Please. The sunset one's particularly lovely. Anyway, so it's been a great evening, a successful AGM, an absolutely brilliant In Conversation. And I can't thank Graham and Jonathan enough for being with us, and for you, our members and guests. And so all I can say is thank you all very much. Have a wonderful what's left of the evening. Have a great day, Jonathan. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. Take care, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for everything that you do. It's wonderful. Thank you very much.
And thank you for having me. Good night.
Bye-bye.